Hello everyone and welcome to a new video of Your Polyglot Academy. Now today we're going to continue our series on how to learn French in 50 days with Essimo, and we're going to continue with lessons 41 and 42, so let's go. Now firstly we're going to start with lesson 41, and as always we're going to start off with the dialogue, so please make sure to listen to it twice, and if you're ready, let's go. Here's the dialogue for lesson 41.
41e leçon.
Un accueil désagréable.
Allô, bonjour. Je suis bien au restaurant La Fleur d'Argent?
Oui, monsieur, vous y êtes.
J'essaie de vous joindre depuis 2 jours. Ça sonne toujours occupé.
J'en suis conscient. Mais depuis que nous sommes dans le guide touristique, le téléphone n'arrête pas de sonner et nous sommes complets presque tous les soirs. Vous pouvez toujours essayer de réserver avec l'application matable.fr, c'est plus sûr.
Oui, je connais cette appli, mais je préfère avoir une voix humaine au bout du fil.
Comme vous voulez. Combien êtes-vous et à quelle heure souhaitez-vous dîner?
Vers 20h30 pour 4 couverts. À la terrasse si possible.
8h30, dites-vous? Oui. Il me reste une petite table pour 4. Mais à l'intérieur, car toutes les tables dehors sont prises. Cela vous convient-il?
Si vous n'avez rien d'autre.
Alors je note. C'est à quel nom?
Ferré, comme le chanteur. Mais rassurez-vous, je ne chanterai pas.
Très drôle. J'ai besoin d'un numéro de portable, ainsi que les détails de votre carte bancaire, pour éviter une annulation de dernière minute.
Vous voulez aussi mon chéquier ou mes empreintes digitales peut-être?
C'est bien ça. Vous pouvez me les envoyer par texto.
Which mirrors English usage. The noun for a software routine, une application, line 6, is generally shortened to une appli, an app. Now, this process of truncating long words is usual in technical contexts such as computing. On a fourth note, en fil, a wire, is often used in reference to telephones, even though landlines have almost vanished. Two common expressions are passer en coupe de fil, to make a phone call, give someone a ring, and au bout du fil, on the line. Now please do not confuse the plural les fils with the word for sang, en fil de fil. In the latter case, the singular and the plural are both pronounced, compared with fil, for fil and fil. On the fifth note, souhaiter is a formal verb meaning to wish or to hope that. It is common in polite contexts. À quelle heure souhaitez-vous venir? What time do you wish or want to come? The noun on souhaite means a desire, a wish, accordingly. The verbal response to someone sneezing is à tes or à vous souhaite, to your desires. An exclamation inducted into English as échoue. On the sixth note, en couvert, from the verb couvrir, to cover, means a place setting in culinary context, hence the expression mettre le couvert, to lay the table. In a restaurant context, the noun refers to a customer or diner, known in the trade as a cover. Now please don't confuse en couvert with en couvercle, meaning a lid or top of a container. That is completely different. On the seventh note, please remember that past participles used as adjectives must agree with their noun as normal adjectives. So, Gabriel est pris ce soir, Gabriel et Marc sont pris ce soir, Lucie est prise ce soir, in this case with an E, and toutes les tables sont prises ce soir with the E and the S. So you can see that it's very important to accordingly conjugate them as normal adjectives. On the eighth note, see lesson 26 note 2. Now using an inverted pronoun, rather est-ce que, to ask a question is formal but quite common in formal social interaction. So, instead of est-ce que cela vous convient, the restaurant owner often inquires cela vous convient-il? And also please listen to the liaison between the final T and the initial vowel. Cela vous convient-il? On the ninth note, this is our first encounter with the future tense, which, in contrast to English, is formed not with an auxiliary but by changing the verb ending. Chanter, in this case, to sing, becomes je chanterai, but we're going to talk about it more detailedly in future lessons. And now finally, on the last note, despite the prevalence of English, French has succeeded in coining native terms in the field of technology. One example is un texto, an SMS. Now, as we concluded our notes, we're going to conclude the lesson with the exercises. So this is exercise number 1.
Exercice 1. Traduisez.
Ce soir, à 20h30, nous accueillons la grande chanteuse et comédienne Elsa Violet.
Michel, j'ai ton fils au bout du fil. Je lui dis d'attendre 2 minutes?
Vous souhaitez venir à quelle heure?
Ça ne me convient pas, mais si vous n'avez rien d'autre.
J'essaie de passer un coup de fil, mais la ligne sonne toujours occupée.
And this is exercise number 2, where you have to fill in missing words. Now, do you have any questions on the grammatical explanations, or maybe on the notes, or maybe on the dialogue itself? If you have such questions, then please make sure to simply write a comment or something like that. And if you'd like to know the solutions of the exercises, then you can submit them as well. If you have no doubts or no questions about anything, then we can continue with lesson 42. Now, as always, we're going to start the lesson with the dialogue. However, lesson 42 is a special lesson because every 7th lesson of this course is devoted to revising and explaining in greater detail what you've learned over the previous days. So lesson 42 is going to be the 6th of such review lessons that we already covered so far, for example, in lessons 7, 14, 21, 28, and 35. Now, first we're going to start with the participles. So the first one we're going to cover is le participe présent. Now, for most regular and irregular verbs, it is formed by dropping the ending from the first person plural of the present tense and adding en to the root. So, penser, the first person plural is pensons, and then you have pensons. Dormir, dormons, dormons, perdre, perdons, perdons. So it's pretty much a case for 95% of the verbs. Now, another question would be, where do we use them, or when do we use them? Now, firstly, they can be used as in English to describe an ongoing action. Here's an example. Le personne habite près d'un aéroport souffre souvent de maux de tête. People living near an airport often get headaches. Similar usage is also in a clause starting with the preposition en. En vérifiant la cave, j'ai trouvé la porte ouverte. When I checked the cellar, I found the door open. The second possibility, or the second main use of the present participle, is as an adjective, in which case it has to agree with the noun. So the phrase c'est une histoire intéressante contains the present participle intéressant from the verb intéresser, but in this case we're adding the e because of the fact that une histoire is a feminine noun, so it has to agree with the noun. It's a very important aspect. Following on, we're going to talk about the participe passé. Now, the past participles. Past participles in French are mostly used to form le passé composé, which is the French past tense, basically. In English, we have the past simple and the present perfect, but in French, we only have the passé composé. We're also going to talk about this tense later on. How do we form the past participles? Well, for group 1 verbs, so for verbs ending in er, simply drop the final R and replace the E with E. Hence, commander would become commandé with an accent, fermer, fermé, etc. And there are no exceptions whatsoever. The rule for group 2, so regular verbs ending in ir with the present participle in issant, is even simpler. You simply have to drop the last letter. So finir is going to become fini, réussir, réussi, and etc. Well, finally, for group 3 verbs, so verbs ending in re, war, ir with a present participle in en, the rules are: re is replaced by u, so vendre would become vendu, attendre, attendu. War verbs also end in u, but with a kind of a different pattern. Recevoir would become reçu, vouloir, voulu, etc. And finally, ir behave mostly as regular group 2 verbs, so simply by dropping the last letter. Partir would become parti, sentir, senti, etc. However, you must consider that there are many exceptions, such as prendre, pris, faire, fait, dire, dit, courir, couru, and most importantly, être, which becomes été, and avoir, Now, finally, when a past participle is used alone as an adjective, as we already mentioned for the present participle, it has to agree in number and gender with its noun. Therefore, toutes les tables sont prises becomes, toutes les tables sont prises means all the tables are taken, and in this case, pris, the past participle for prendre, receives also an e and an s at the end because we're talking about a feminine plural noun. Now we're going to talk about le passé composé, which is basically the present tense, the perfect tense. Now, le passé composé is composed of 2 parts, an auxiliary and a past participle, as we already saw in the last lessons. It is used in the spoken and written language to translate 2 English tenses, the past simple and the present perfect. Now, there is, theoretically speaking, an equivalent tense, le passé simple, and in this case simple because it consists of a single word, which we cover only briefly at the end of these lessons because it is used chiefly in literature and occasionally very formal speech. Now, the usual auxiliary is avoir, although some verbs take être, as we shall see in the next set of lessons. Now, here are 3 tables with some examples for the passé composé for 3 group verbs. So for group 1, group 2, and group 3. In this case, group 1, manger, to eat. J'ai mangé, I have eaten, or I ate. Tu as mangé, il, elle a mangé, nous avons mangé, vous avez mangé, and ils, elles ont mangé. So you have the auxiliary verb, which is in avoir, and after that, directly followed by the past participle. For group 2, finir, to finish, we have a similar scenario. J'ai fini, I have finished, or I finished, depending on the context. Tu as fini, il, elle a fini, nous avons fini, vous avez fini, and ils, elles ont fini. Finally, for group 3 verbs, in this case we have voir, to see. J'ai vu, I saw, or I have seen. Tu as vu, il, elle a vu, nous avons vu, vous avez vu, ils, elles ont vu. Now, we should also cover some other information about le passé composé to kind of understand it better and to kind of use it correctly at all times. The negative is formed by placing ne and pas around the auxiliary. So, je n'ai pas mangé. In this case, we have ne before the auxiliary est, and then pas right after it before the main verb. Nous n'avons pas fini has the same structure, and also ils n'ont pas vu. Now, how do we form an interrogative question? Well, we have 3 possibilities. The first one is with a rising tone. Tu as vu. The second one is with est-ce que. So, est-ce que tu as vu? And then finally with an inversion. So we're going to invert the auxiliary and the pronoun. So instead of saying tu as vu, we would say as-tu vu? The perfect tense relates to actions that took place in the past and are now complete. In this context, it is equivalent to the past simple tense in English. Here's an example. J'ai vu le notaire hier. I saw the notary yesterday. However, by removing the time marker, it translates to the present perfect, because by saying j'ai vu le notaire, it doesn't indicate when that happened. So it could have happened 4 years ago, 2 days ago, 5 seconds ago, and because of that, it agrees with the usage of the present perfect. Now, talking about the present perfect, when adverbs such as jamais and toujours are used, the verb is also translated with the present perfect. So, j'ai toujours voulu, or je n'ai jamais voulu apprendre le français. I've always or never wanted to learn French. This is also the case for depuis, which means both for and since. And lastly, French also tends to use the present form for actions or sequences of actions that have taken place and are now complete. This is known as le présent historique, literally the historic or narrative present. Hier, je vais au marché pour faire les courses, mais j'oublie mon portefeuille. Yesterday, I went to the market to do the shopping, but I forgot my wallet. And because we're talking about actions that already took place and are now fully complete, we can also use the present, historic present in such cases. However, I would rather recommend to always kind of try to build past tenses with the passé composé, as you have no possibility of making mistakes, because of the fact that the passé composé is used in pretty much 95% of sentences with an indication of past events. Now, it's also important to talk about comparatives and superlatives, as we briefly covered them in the last lessons. The comparative of superiority is always formed with plus, with the adjective, and que after it. Here's an example. Londres est plus grand que Paris. London is bigger than Paris. The same rule pretty much applies to comparisons of inferiority, formed with moins and then que, right after it. Le film est moins intéressant que le livre. The movie is less interesting than the book. Now, how do you form the superlative? Well, to form the superlative, simply put the definite article le or la for the singular, masculine or feminine, and les for the plural before plus or moins. Here are two examples. Le bus est le moyen le plus rapide d'aller à Lille. The bus is the quickest way to get to Lille, and c'est l'arrondissement le moins bruyant de la ville. It's the least noise district in the city, so you have le plus rapide and le moins bruyant in these cases. Now, there are not that many regular adjectives trying to form the comparative and the superlative, but 3 of those are very important, such as bon, bien, and mauvais. Bon becomes meilleur and le ou la meilleure. Bien becomes mieux and le la mieux. And mauvais becomes pire and le la pire. So this is also very important to notice. And now finally, to conclude this lesson, or to conclude the grammatical explanations of what we've talked about this lesson, we have useful expressions on the phone, so while calling with someone. By answering the phone, you would say hello, 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 oui, hello, yes, or simply oui, yes. By asking who's calling, you would simply say qui est l'appareil, who is calling. By checking if you've reached the right number, you would say je suis bien chez, and then the name. So have I reached name's residence, or je suis bien au or à la, and then you would name the business or the place, which means have I reached following business or place. Now to ask who the caller is for someone else, you would say c'est de la part de qui, who shall I say is calling, or shorter and kind of less polite, you would say de la part de qui, by simply asking who's calling. So that's basically the same. Now, before transferring a call, you would say ne quittez pas or quittez pas, which means hold the line. And then right after that, je vous la passe or je vous le passe. I'll put you through to him or her. To indicate that the line is busy, you would say la ligne est occupée, the line is busy, or ça sonne occupé, it's busy, which simply indicates that the line is engaged. To leave a message, you would say est-ce que je peux laisser un message? Can I leave a message? And to ask for a call back, you would say est-ce qu'il or est-ce qu'elle peut me rappeler, s'il vous plaît? Could she or he call me back, please? Now, while offering to call back, you would also say je rappellerai plus tard. I'll call back later. And then finally, if you can't hear properly, you would say je ne vous entends pas. Parlez plus fort, s'il vous plaît. I can't hear you. Please speak louder. Sometimes you would even say simply je ne vous entends pas bien. I can't hear you very well. Or in some cases, if you would like to the person to speak slowlier, then you would say pouvez-vous répéter lentement, s'il vous plaît? So could you repeat slowly? Now, we ended the most important grammatical topics that we covered in the last lessons, and we're going to conclude the lesson with the review dialogue. So please listen to it.
42e leçon.
Dialogue de révision.
Est-ce que vous avez vidé la corbeille à papier ce matin?
Oui, pourquoi? Avez-vous perdu quelque chose?
Je ne trouve pas mon chéquier, mais je l'ai peut-être oublié à la maison ce matin.
Je suis sûr que je l'ai vu quelque part. Sur votre bureau, peut-être?
Non, j'ai regardé, mais il n'y est pas. Mais où est-ce que je l'ai mis? Mais attendez, je suis bête. Je l'ai laissé à l'accueil tout à l'heure.
Heureusement que vous l'avez trouvé.
J'ai oublié de vous dire que Cécile Durieux, la comédienne, a appelé tout à l'heure.
Ah bon? Je suis étonné. Qu'est-ce qu'elle veut?
Elle dit qu'elle essaie de vous joindre depuis quelques jours. Depuis mardi dernier précisément. Elle a laissé plusieurs messages. Pouvez-vous la rappeler? Son numéro est le 07 70 80 90.
Okay, so I hope that you understood most of it, and the exercise for this lesson is simply going to be to translate this dialogue, which also contains the most important vocabulary we've tackled in the last lessons. Now, do you have any questions whatsoever? I hope not. In case that you would have some questions or whatsoever, then please make sure to leave a comment. And as always, thanks for joining in, and I wish you a nice day, and see you soon. Goodbye.